Okay, gang, howdy. The topic for today, this week, this module is public sphere discourse, rhetoric as public agitation. That's the module we're in. And we looked at the piece by Zarefsky already on the decline of public debate. It's a short little piece he wrote for USA Today. He covers really good ground. We're mostly focusing on the kind of concepts where he's talking about what is public, what is this business of deliberation, what are some of the challenges, and we continue that kind of analysis today with the Jerry Hauser piece, Features of the Public Sphere. There's a little bit of resonance from the last one from Zarefsky through this one here. I think he goes a little bit further, sort of conceptually, goes a little bit deeper on some things. Doesn't give quite so much of a history as Zarefsky. And these are really just the two pieces where we're going to be looking briefly at what this business of the public sphere is. I was saying to students in class on Monday that I used to teach a class on the public sphere. I took a grad seminar back in grad school on this business of the public sphere. And then I came here and I did a version of that class for a number of years. I really enjoyed teaching that class. I stopped teaching it maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. It just sort of felt like it was getting dated, frankly, and then I think is a sign of the times and something to be kind of worried about, I think. And where we are today is in a much different place than where we were when I was teaching this class. So when I was teaching this class, it seemed as though the public sphere was something that we could talk about as a live possibility. I don't know that we can so much anymore for a number of reasons, which we'll get into some of them. This isn't meant to be just about let's trash on social media for killing the public sphere. But it is to try to kind of understand some of the recent changes and how we think about rhetoric in that realm of the public. And so what is the public? How does rhetoric operate there? What are some of the challenges and so on? And knowing all that will, I think, help us to better understand the weird place that we're in right now and some of the challenges. So I just put together these notes, even though it's a short little reading. When it's a little more dense and technical, then I like to throw together some notes just to help you map your way through it. So I think everything you need is right here. And so we'll proceed. Right off the bat, when we were talking in class on Monday, I was just sort of starting broad, like, what do you guys think about when you think about the public? And it was interesting to get people's reactions to think about things like, public relations in terms of like how businesses or organizations like interface with the public. We talked about like, is the public just outside? Is it like whenever we leave our house, we're out in the public? Or like, can we be in the public when we're in our homes, right? What about when we're at work? Or what about when we go to a hockey game or a movie or a restaurant, right? Well, the answer to all of this is sort of like, it depends. The main thing to be thinking about here, well, let's look at the first point is right off the bat, the language that he's using. Words like civilization, words like public education, words like community, words like citizen and citizenship. All right, so as we talked about with Zarefsky, when we're thinking about the public and we're thinking about public discourse, we're interested in that realm of our kind of total social lives. When I think of the social, I think of just sort of all of us living together, the city of Las Vegas or the state of Nevada or this country or the whole civilization, like Western civilization or the whole planet or whoever, however we want to slice it up. We're talking about this realm of togetherness, right? That's the sort of social. We can sort of talk about cities, regions, states, whatever, but it's all social. We are human creatures who are social by nature, right? And so we're talking about a certain quality of our social activity, our social lives. And it's discursive, right? It's about communication, and it's a certain kind of discourse, a certain kind of communication, rhetorical, meaning that it wants something, it wants to do something, it wants to accomplish something, right? So as we talked about in this last class, publics want change. I used to ask my public sphere students, what do publics want when they wake up in the morning? They want change. They want something different. They see a problem or a tension or an injustice or something that's wrong or not good or something that we just want differently. And they agitate, hence the title of the module, and they engage in different activities, right? And so what are the nature of those activities? Symbolic, mediational, performative, sit-ins, boycotts, right? Anything that's sort of trying to send a message with others who share our concerns, not because they're our family members or our coworkers or our best friends or because we pay them or because we're trying to hook up with someone. Maybe that's part of it. Like the part where we are interested in our capacity as citizens, as people who inhabit some community, some realm of our social world, right? And there's something going on and we don't like it and we want it to change, and so we engage in this public discourse business. So he asked this question at the end of the first page, just what are the constituents or what are the elements of publicness? And he's working through a lot of literature. There's been a lot of writing and really high level conceptual stuff on this business of public spheres and publicness. And he's really just trying to like smash it down and shrink it down, sort of like Zarefsky. This is a little bit more of a kind of academic approach. And so we get a little bit more stuff to chew on, and hence the full page here of notes. But he says right off the bat there, top left on 438, he's thinking about publicness in its discursive, its communicational aspects, right? So if you look at a stadium at a hockey game or a football game or a baseball, whatever, some kind of game or concert or Super Bowl, you see people. You see a whole bunch of people. They're strangers, right? Are they engaged in a public? Well, not really. They're just a mass of people here for like entertainment purposes, right? Now, we could talk about elements of publicness that might intersect with a Super Bowl in terms of Colin Kaepernick taking a knee. I don't know if he went to the Super Bowl, but like football players will take a knee sometimes. That's a kind of political, symbolic statement, right? That is a kind of public discourse because it's saying something about something that affects us as citizens, right? I had actually a grad student do a project, a professional paper that I helped direct on the Olympic, Black Power moment, right? The raising of the fist, and the whole project was about analyzing that as an act of raising a voice, right? Stating we are here, look at us, right? Head down, fist up. Right, so again, Olympics are entertainment, they're athletics, but the public stuff can intersect. It can kind of emerge in basically any kind of a situation. So it can happen in our homes, we can be in the public on our toilets if we are engaged in some kind of public discourse, right? And that's why we get into this business of, publics aren't like just a physical thing. Is that where we are next here? Yeah, points 3 and 4. 3 says good stuff. The public transforms us from strangers, from private, personal strangers, into a shared world through communication, through common meanings, right? So it's this process of trying to throw out our frustrations, our arguments, our grievances, our interpretations and opinions for inspection by others, for scrutiny, for engagement. And that process of kind of back and forth, and you say something and they say something and we kind of take a turn, and they might challenge our ideas or refute them or agree with them. And this process is all deliberative in that kind of Zarefsky sense of like we're opening our ideas to inspection by others. And that's a key part of it, right? So this business of like in our private, personal citizen capacity, we become a public through the process of discourse, through the process of challenge and offering and sharing and testing and contesting. And we want to establish this idea of a common world through common meanings. He mentions Hannah Arendt a few times. I've assigned this reading a few times to my students, and Arendt talks about this idea of a table as a kind of metaphor for thinking about the public. And she says, people can come to a table with very different kinds of, perspectives and subjectivities and orientations and worldviews. But we want to try to establish that kind of common togetherness. That table kind of represents our attempts to come together, and we can at least agree on the sort of some basic stuff, right? That's the idea of public discourse, to try to make common through our private individual selves, using language, using communication to establish commonness, okay? So yeah, number 4, he says, put in different terms, the notion of a public as a social psychological space of a common world having common meanings for those who inhabit it. This is much like what Zarefsky said about the public is not, he says it's not an empirical reality so much as a perspective or an orientation that guides activity. And it's sort of governed by norms of conduct, certain ways of doing things. And Hauser says the same thing here. He says, the next number 5, he says, also good mentioning interests, values, and norms. We've been talking about interest this whole semester, right? We engage in rhetorical discourse when we feel that our interests are affected, or we try to affect the interests of others, right? But there's something that we care about that matters to us, that touches us, that affects us, either good, bad, or whatever, right? But if we're not interested in something at all, then they're not going to really pay attention to it. We're not going to engage in that conversation, that ongoing discourse about some issue, some topic, whatever it might be, right? So, I used to talk a lot in my classes about food waste. I was really upset about when I did the research on how much food we waste as a country, as a world, right? 40% of the food that Americans purchase ends up in landfills. And that's just gut-wrenching, right? When you think about how much gases are emitted from all of this rotting food, and it amounts to like the greenhouse emissions of a pretty sizable nation. And I just would, yammer on about this. And I actually had a few students who got really mobilized on this topic for whatever reason that spoke to them. And I had them come to me after class, and even one of them came to grad school because she was really this is it. This is what I want to focus on, right? So when we are frustrated, aggrieved, struggling, suffering, we throw out discourse, we post, we write letters to the editor, we shout on the campus quad, we have a bullhorn, we stand on a street corner with a sign, right? We try to send our message out there into the world for others to pick up and scrutinize and hopefully carry it on, right? So publics exist through the circulation of discourse, of communication. It's the ongoing talking, sharing, engaging, listening, challenging, just to the extent that discourse is alive because we're participating in it, then the public itself is alive, whatever that particular interest or challenge is. So these are all key ideas so far. Number 6 here, this notion that facts are meaningless. This is a powerful idea, top right on 438. It gets into some uncomfortable territory, but it's this idea of does something actually exist or is it real if it hasn't been thrown into a public for scrutiny, right? So I make this point I used to make this point in my class. If it's just if a tree falls in the forest kind of idea. If there's a problem out there in the world, and a real material problem poison in our water or we discover something in our food or whatever. If there's an objective problem out in the world, but no one talks about it, no one shouts about it, does it exist? In terms of public discourse, in terms of public sphere engagement, it doesn't really exist, and it doesn't kind of matter. As a matter of fact, it doesn't even really exist unless someone starts talking about it. I'm thinking about that movie Erin Brockovich, which is pretty old at this point. I don't know if you've ever seen it or heard of it even. Julia Roberts, it's a Steven Soderbergh movie from decades ago, I think, but it is a really good movie. It's really dramatic and sort of surprising, and there's a lot of good speeches in it, and it really is about this kind of stuff, about a woman who discovers that a company has been poisoning a nearby neighborhood through, pollutants leaching into the water and the soil, and then it gets into their food, and these people are suffering, and they don't even know why they're suffering. They have cancer, they have all these treatments, and it's when Erin Brockovich comes along and she starts to kind of poke around and notice that, oh my goodness, it's because of that factory over there. And she starts agitating, and she starts talking, and she starts making trouble, and she ends up winning them this massive settlement, and it's this real kind of David and Goliath story. But it's really also about these public sphere communication dynamics. It's a really awesome movie if you want to check it out. But this idea of we need witnesses, we need to share our findings, our discoveries. This idea of citizens as journalists, like going out there and sniffing around and finding things that are problematic and throwing it into the open social kind of conversation and see who picks it up and what happens to it. That's sort of all of our responsibility, is to try our best to scrutinize the conditions of our lives, and when we find problems, to try to get it out there and share it. And this was the early promise of social media, was that it was going to accelerate all of this stuff and create so many more witnesses and so many more audiences for scrutiny. And there is a lot of that does happen, although it's gone so far in the direction of like conspiracy and disinformation and misinformation, so we never really know how to trust what we're seeing. And now, of course, we've entered the world of AI, which makes it even weirder. But again, this is all social media, pre-internet kind of stuff. And so the ideas, I think, are still worth knowing and then seeing how we can kind of compare them to the situation we're in now. All right, let's see. Number 7, all substantive interests are dependent on communication in the public sphere because, 438, because it is only through such activity that diverse individuals can uncover a world of the we. This sounds a little bit utopian almost, but it's good. I like this idea of, imagine everyone's different. Every single person or small little group or community that we inhabit, we identify with these folks over here, these folks over here, and we have so many different little spheres of association, right? And in those spheres of association, whether they're like online forums or teams or clubs or whatever, we find that we are frustrated about something. We want something to change, right? So the idea here is like all of the diverse organizations that we inhabit are great, but then when we want to change, we have to kind of throw things into the mass hopper of social conversation. And it's through that process of throwing things out and receiving them on the other end and inspecting and sharing and all of that give and take is meant to make our issues substantive, right? Things that we care about. We got to struggle to get it on the public consciousness and the public agenda. That's the whole point here. And the last business here on this page, 438, bottom right, is this idea of between. We talked a little bit about this with Zarefsky, but the public is not the workplace. It's not the home. It's not the state, the government. We're not talking about formal government. We're not talking about, city hall or the act of voting, voting booth. That's not public in the way we're talking about it here. Publics exist between and cut across all these things, right? So again, you can be sitting in a classroom at school. That doesn't necessarily make you part of a public. It's the discourse, it's the conversation and the issues and the way that we engage. And it doesn't really matter where we are. We can be sitting anywhere, outside, inside, we can be with whoever. But as long as some matter, some issue that we are struggling with arises in our discourse and we are trying to send it out and circulate it, there's the public, right? And so I talked about it on Monday as being a virtual phenomenon in the way that a tree is a virtual phenomenon when you're looking at a tree seed, right? Or a plant is a virtual phenomenon when you're looking at a plant seed. It's a potential thing. It exists, but only through the talking. And when will the talking happen and who will do the talking? It's hard to know in advance, right? Just tracking the discourse, tracking the conversation is the only real way that you can see a public taking shape and living, right? And it is alive insofar as the discourse is alive. If the discourse falls away, if people just tire of talking about it, or if change is accomplished and, hey, we're satisfied, we don't really need to talk about this anymore, then it just kind of melts away and public disappears, right? So publics are always kind of doing this kind of thing. They're a virtual phenomenon. They come into being. They maybe live for a little while. Maybe they make the change that they want. Maybe they don't, right? But they're always kind of moving through the discourse, through people talking or not talking. All right, so he gets down to this business of several conditions that must be present for public spheres to exist. This is number 9. Certain kinds of I guess criteria for how to understand whether a public can come into being. It's meant to be accessible by everyone. Everyone who wants to should have the ability to have a say about whatever it is they want to talk about, share, agitate on behalf of. It should be accessible to all, right? And if you feel like your voice isn't being heard, then the argument is to keep struggling, keep trying to get that voice out there, right? To raise your fist or take a knee or whatever it might be to get your message out. Information must be accessible and it must be transmittable to others. We need to have a way of getting it out there. Institutional guarantees. We need to have education. We need to have forums and platforms and opportunities for doing this work of talking, sharing, scrutinizing, and so on. They should be open-ended, meaning that there shouldn't be some strict notion of what we can and cannot talk about. Anything should be fair game. It, again, is a matter of how we talk and who does the talking and what the response is that determines it all. And, of course, there's power issues in terms of, who has the strongest voice. Money matters here. Obviously, we live in a time of platforms and algorithms, and we understand how things get shaped and moved around by influencers who have all kinds of followers. They have a bigger kind of command over the circulation of discourse. But you can buy followers, right? And you can sort of cheat the game. And so there's even power dynamics in terms of how you get into a place of having that platform power and so on. But it matters, right? How we navigate power, how we challenge power, how it factors into our ability to get messages out, to be received or blocked, right? All of these dynamics matter. I want to wrap up here because we are already at 20. So the last thing are these 4 questions. These are rich, deep, complex questions that he wants to kind of just get into our minds here, things to be thinking about. The first one has to do with the consciousness of social actors in terms of their potential for collective action with strangers. My sense is right now that consciousness is very shrunken. It's very tight. It's very limited. I don't see a lot of desire, appetite, sense of willingness, or even ability to talk with others, right? There's this real sense of, I only want to talk with those who I already understand and know. But this idea of reaching across our social divides, whether it's Republican and liberal or city and country or small town, big city, right? We have this real sense of aversion to it. So that first question helps us understand this sort of frostiness of the public these days. Number 2, how might we characterize the diversity and activity of the public that emerges in the public sphere? Yeah, what are the kinds of activities? Remember Occupy Wall Street. That was kind of a new one. I don't know if that's going back a little bit still, but there was this we're tired of Wall Street determining everything and everything that matters being dictated by the Dow Jones and all this. And there were these big sit-ins, and I think this was turn of the millennium, early 2000s kind of era. And there was all kinds of new little tactics that these protesters were adopting, right? Remember the pussy hat revolt after the first Trump administration. After Trump was elected the first time, there was this massive display of the pink hats as a kind of rebuke of Trump's treatment of women and his thoughts on the fairer sex and so on. What do they do? What do publics do? How do they try to get their message out? What are the means, symbolic means or material means, like withholding money, boycott? There was just the other day some boycott the economy or no shopping kind of day. These are all tactics that would be considered discursive in terms of trying to make some change, right? So it all counts. Number 3, prevailing knowledge and power relations. Here I think I noted in the notes algorithms. It's a perfect example of the relationship between power and knowledge, right? Because these companies, think about TikTok, Chinese owned, able to adjust the algorithm as it sees fit. No one gets to know how the algorithm works, how it's tweaked. You can funnel information in very powerful ways, right? So knowledge, algorithms, power, it all makes perfect sense. Finally, what are the conditions for appearance in the public? This is really good. We appear in the public. That's what we do, right? Publics are spaces of appearance. If not our bodies, at least our ideas, our words, our symbolic messaging, our compositions, and so on. But what are the conditions that either allow us or prevent us from appearing, right? This business of voice, I think, is important. And as a way to sort of get out into the public consciousness. But you can imagine conditions that maybe make it difficult to appear. right? What does it mean to have a voice versus not having a voice? Why is it that certain influencers have so many followers and others don't? What is the magic that allows them to rise up to the top and appear more so than anyone else, right? Is it beauty? Is it skill at knowing how to work the algorithm? Is it eloquence? And so on and so on. These are all juicy, useful questions for understanding the nature of publics. And I know that that is a lot in a short amount of time, and we could go on and on and on. Like I say, I used to teach a class on this, and even in those classes, we could barely kind of scratch the surface. It's an important concept. I don't see it as an active, very alive, dynamic kind of phenomenon today, but it's one that does matter and is deeply important to the practice of democracy on behalf of the citizens, because this doesn't have to do with government officials, with political leaders. This is us. This is citizens expressing themselves together as strangers, but connecting over matters of common concern, whatever that might be. So there you go. The next thing we're going to look at is some examples of this kind of stuff by some rhetoric scholars. And so I hope you find it interesting. This is the action of public rhetoric in the latter part of the 20th century. So see you next time. Cheers.